Hello and welcome. This is Ryan Lee with the GSMC College Football Podcast. With a quick editing note, just be wary. My microphone that I usually use for this podcast was having technical issues, so I had to go to my backup microphone, which doesn't sound really as good or as clear or just as anything as this one at all. So bear with this episode. I swear that the content revolving Les Miles and Trevor Lawrence are really awesome to listen to. The content's amazing. The audio quality might not be the greatest, but just plan on bearing with me. I just wanted to throw that in there as I'm editing this. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for bearing with me. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you from the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Ryan Lee, back here once again, and we've got a whole boatload of things to talk about, including all things Trevor Lawrence, my initial reactions to the footage of his pro day, including the news regarding his shoulder surgery and rehab, and I'm going to be getting into a head coaching departure, and let's just get right into it. I'm going to lead off with a topic that is not the most pleasant to talk about because honestly, I just don't want to talk about it, but I think it's really important because of the fact that the name involved in some very recent news is actually quite big, and the circumstance is really serious, actually. Anyone who knows me personally or who listens to this show regularly, they understand that I'm someone who I'm not shy to talk about certain issues because I feel like if they're not talked about, they go silent. And when things go silent, especially in various circumstances, whether if it was the COVID-19 situation or over the summer you had the Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement or whatever it may be, any of those things, the thing that you don't want to do, especially to a bunch of people who are struggling, is to silence it, especially with the social media release, for lack of a better term, of late with NBA star Jeremy Lin going all over this whole thing about how there's a bunch of Asian American hate right now, especially ever since pandemic came around, people including NBA players calling him coronavirus to his face, stuff like that. It's really important to talk about because especially in the climate we're in now, especially in the environment we're in now, it's one of those situations where if we don't talk about it, it won't be mentioned. And especially a player who has a very prominent platform, to say the least, especially someone in that community like Jeremy Lin. I can't really think of any other players in similar situations who have as big of a name or reputation as Jeremy Lin. Maybe the only other person I could think of, especially in that Asian American community, is maybe Yao, maybe Naomi Osaka in women's tennis. Those are the only ones I could really think about. But Jeremy Lin used his platform every single way he could. And when you have someone who's willing to use their platform and use it to better the situation they're in, it's going to catch a lot of flack. Jeremy Lin faced a lot of hate for it. LeBron faced a lot of heat during everything with the Black Lives Matter movement. And then there's all this stuff going on with, USA Olympics and Me Too and any single thing like that is going to get a lot of hate because people are uncomfortable. They're unnatural talking about it. Try a little experiment. Fold your hands over each other, one another. Just hold your own hand and then flip it. For me, for example, I usually have my right thumb in front of my left thumb when I hold my own hand, and then I switch it so my left thumb's on top of my right thumb. It bothers me. It's uncomfortable. It's something I don't want to talk about. It's something I don't want to deal with. And the reason why I mention that is because it's why a lot of these things don't get talked about, and why when a lot of terrible things are happening, no one wants to raise a voice. No one wants to really bring anything up or take any sort of action because the subject matter is uncomfortable. And the reason why I mentioned all of this stuff in the first place isn't just because I wanted to bring it up, but it's also because of the fact that in some instances, people do take action of the circumstance. It's just in a lot of those circumstances, they don't take action quick enough, or the actions are wrong, or whatever the consequences are, just aren't severe enough. Especially if the circumstances call for something more severe. Like, you can compare Josh Gordon, who has gotten several suspensions by the National Football League for marijuana use, versus someone like, I believe it was Ray Rice, who only got a multi-game suspension for essentially beating a woman in an elevator. And Kareem Hunt only got a couple game suspension for beating a woman in a hotel room. And then you have Josh Gordon, who smokes a little bit of, marijuana inside of a state that's legal in Washington State when he was with Seattle, and he gets banned indefinitely. In that case, that is a whole bunch of the wrong action for the same circumstance, or two completely different circumstances. I could argue one's worse than the other. And the wrong circumstance was had in both situations. The wrong consequence happened. And in some of those cases, they happen later than they should. Whether it is the several distant cases throughout Hollywood, especially, you had guys like Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein. But when those cases came to light, things like Weinstein and Bill Cosby and Kevin Spacey and all that, it brought up a lot of stuff that hadn't really come into light. And the consequences had to be due to past actions, because whomever it was, they used their power, they used their money to hide everything. And because of that, the consequences were significantly more severe, where they essentially got blacklisted from the entirety of Hollywood. And the same circumstance most likely is going to be had with, I guess, now former Kansas head coach Les Miles. And I understand the transition there wasn't great, but the point's still going to stand. Les Miles' career in Kansas was not really well respected. It's nothing really to be amazed about. I mean, went 0-9 last year, 3-9 the year before, and kind of had this constant decline at LSU, especially in the last 3 years there. Wins the national championship in 2007, then continues having really solid seasons, and then goes 8-5, 9-3, then all of a sudden 2-2, and that's when he's no longer the coach at LSU. But somewhere along that way, especially that tail end of the years at LSU, there was a controversy where there have been allegations, especially within the last couple of weeks, where LSU launched an investigation against Les Miles, where he was having inappropriate relationships with female students, whether if it was interpersonal relationships with these women, or whether if it was, I guess for lack of a better term, judging them or, hiring them for the wrong reasons. He essentially would use these women for recruitment, or they would use him for, his own personal gain. In some cases, he'd have relationships with these women. In some cases, he would monitor the way they looked or the way they dressed, just so they could attract potential recruits when they came to his school. It's like something you see out of a movie, if I had to be honest, but no, this stuff is legit. And all of that kind of led to this investigation by LSU, where they actually ended up firing him, but that was mostly due to poor performances. LSU eventually launched this investigation because they sensed some sort of, for lack of a better word, foul play in this circumstance. And in this case, the foul play is an inappropriate relationship, especially with a student or students. And once again, the reason why I mention any of this is because of the fact that a lot of the news has been coming out, especially in the past several weeks, where Kansas has actually let go of Les Miles due to the findings of these investigations. Because the details of these investigations have been coming into light, Kansas looks at them and essentially just says, you're going to be let go because of all the stuff we found out about your past, and because of the fact that whatever you did back at LSU could be potentially happening here, and we don't want to do that for the safety of the program, for the safety of the athletic department, and just as importantly, the safety of our school and its students. Because I personally have no idea if he's still resuming these activities in Kansas or not. However, it is completely possible he could be. There is nothing that tells me he's not still doing this stuff at Kansas. There is nothing to make me believe that he's straight and clear after 7 years in that ballpark. Unless something significant happens and he has some epiphany of some sort, or there's some sort of severe consequence. It's not easy for a lot of people to change in 7 years, or for people to change at all. It's not very easy to do that. And because of these actions, Les Miles got let go from Kansas. And the reason I wanted to initiate those first couple of remarks is because the segue, or I guess the relationship between those events was essentially like, hey, this bad thing happens, except it doesn't come to light for a really long time, most likely because of the trauma and the emotional weight really hit on some of these victims, or some of these survivors, however you want to word it, or these people who got caught in the mix. The emotional struggle of it all traumatized and made them scared to go out, because they're going against someone who has all this power and money and access to resources to essentially shut them up. They're afraid that if they tried to say anything, they would just get pushed away into the side and just find a way to keep them quiet so that essentially this guy can keep coaching. Same thing happened about 5 years ago to Larry Nassar. He was the head trainer of the women's Olympic gymnastics team. And ever since, everything went on with Aly Raisman, especially a couple of years ago when she spoke up against that whole thing, she really spoke up against it. From essentially the age of 18 until the age of about 19, she was heavily traumatized for it. And because of that, she is one of the reasons why the whole thing with USA Gymnastics came to light in the first place. Now, everything that I've mentioned here so far has been some really serious stuff, and it is serious stuff. But the reason why I mention it isn't because it's stuff I want to talk about, but just like a lot of things, there's things that has to be talked about. There's things that have to be brought up and things that are important to talk about because of the fact that it has major consequences. And for anyone who has had to experience this type of thing, especially from a high-powered person like Les Miles, I can't imagine to begin to understand what it feels like, especially if it was as inappropriate as some of the reports have been claiming, especially if some of the things that have been going on are as difficult or as what it says they are. Considering what I've read on the reports and the fact that the investigation is still ongoing, this was the right move. And I hate to start with a topic like this, but at the same time, it's not a topic to be left untold. So that was the first segment. I didn't really want to go down this hole, but because it was reported on, and because I saw that it could bring up a potentially important topic, a second important topic on top of the actually reported topic, it seemed like it could make sense. And just like a lot of my segments, I stand by them. And I just hope that more details come to light in the near future. But having Les Miles out as the Jayhawks head coach is 100% the right move. That's been it for our first segment. We'll be coming right back. And when we do, we're talking all Trevor. That's all coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
But Brantley back here once again, and we just had to bring up some of the news, including Les Miles and the investigation launched against him. However, we're going to be going into a much brighter topic, for lack of a better word. We're going to be talking about Trevor. Yes, we're going to be talking about the projected number 1 overall draft pick, Trevor Lawrence. And I'm going to simply start off with this. Aside from the fact that he has, insane locks and the flow is absolutely a beaut, the talent is unreal. And I was watching some clips, and one of them came from a former NFL exec. I want to say it was from Scott Pioli, an NFL Network reporter and former NFL executive. He mentioned how this year's draft is going to be kind of a crazy one, especially considering the fact that a lot of conferences get to play full schedules. The Mountain West didn't, the Big Ten didn't, the Pac-12 didn't. But that because of the amount of tape that's available for some of these other conferences like the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, that it could potentially affect the draft stock of some of those schools, not only because there's more tape available, but also because of the fact that GMs have just been more exposed and accustomed to seeing those players. So you might get guys like, Trevor Lawrence, or maybe someone like Mac Jones, who could be getting more exposure than a guy like Justin Fields, who played only half the schedule they played. Don't get me wrong, Justin Fields played an exceptional year. It's just the amount of tape on someone like him versus a guy like Mac Jones or Trevor Lawrence is only half of what those guys were able to produce in terms of the amount of film they have. And the reason why I mention that is because of the fact that Trevor Lawrence's skill set is absolutely insane. He's got a really talented arm. He knows how to throw from almost every single angle. He can put some zip on it. He can put some of that power if he needs to. He's got some touch if he needs it as well. He can throw from almost every angle he can think of. He can run as well, which is all you really need in the quarterback today. Is you can't just have somebody who's still in the pocket. You need someone who can move around a little bit, maybe be able to create something with a broken play, and then, launch when ready. And when Scott Pioli did that interview with Good Morning Football on the NFL Network, I thought it was actually a really interesting point that he brought up, and how a lot of these pro days and a lot of these mid-pro day combine workouts are going to be more crucial than ever. Whether if it's setting up a little thing in the college campuses doing a 40-yard dash, or whether they get a spotter and do the bench press or whatever it may be. All we know is that there's going to be no in-house combine like there was in the last several years in Indianapolis and Lucas Oil Stadium, where all the prospects, all the coaches just gather in one location. They get to not only evaluate the talent right then and there, but all the psychological evaluations and all the interviews can be done right there in the spot as well. Well, at least to my knowledge, all the interviews are going to be done, most likely over Zoom or from significantly socially distanced. However, some of those workouts that really boosted draft stocks, like, for example, DK Metcalf running a 4.3 and having one of the best vertical jumps, as well as just absolutely dominating every single drill, really skyrocketed his draft stock from a late third to a late second. Or whether if it's, somebody like John Ross, whose draft stock was very meh, but when he ran a 4.22 at the combine and broke the combine's fastest 40-yard dash record, really drafted his high stock, really rose his draft stock into a top 10 pick. Didn't really pan out as much as people hoped, but still. So the combine is really important in the aspect of it can help rise people's draft stock. It kind of is that showcase of overall athleticism. How fast can you run? How strong can you lift? How far can you jump? How do you perform in these position-specific drills? Whatever it may be. And I just demonstrated 2 instances where having that combine is so important because excelling in one or maybe multiple of the drills can really boost someone's stock up. And in some cases, they really needed it. Like DK Metcalf isn't going to be a superstar if he doesn't have that absolutely outstanding combine performance. He maybe doesn't necessarily have the same results he's had in the last several years to start his career so far if he doesn't have Russell Wilson at quarterback, if he doesn't have Tyler Lockett on the other side, potentially putting him in single coverage when he needs a double. Maybe the defenses in some of those plays are doubling Lockett and vice versa, whatever it may be. Or maybe they're focusing more on containing Russ in the pocket, whatever it may be. All I know is that if Metcalf doesn't have a combine the way he did, he might have fallen further, might have gone to a lesser team with a lesser quarterback, and therefore would have had a lesser career. And then you have some instances like John Ross where he has an amazing performance. He gets drafted higher than he was initially intended to be, and then doesn't really garner the same results. Now, the reason why this lines up with Trevor is because I saw that entire clip of his pro day essentially highlighting every single one of his throws that he made in order to, impress the scouts, specifically, as I'm sure most people are aware of, Urban Meyer specifically. Now, the reason why I mention that is because that pro day was led by Jordan Palmer, and Trevor Lawrence, having a guy like that on the sidelines, he knows what he's doing, because Jordan Palmer is often seen and sought out as one of the top quarterback coaches in the nation, essentially, and if not the world. And the reason why Palmer does it is because the way he chalks it up is that I'd rather coach one position full-time than to coach multiple positions part-time, which is a fair analysis. And some of the guys he's coached, whether if it's out of college or in college or even a couple of years into the pros, it's a really good list. And I'm just going to bring up some of the top names that he's brought in over the past 5 years. And some of the big guys that he's coached over the last several years includes last year's number 1 overall draft pick, Joe Burrow, number 3 and number 7 draft picks of 3 years ago in Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, and 2 of the top quarterbacks from 2017 in Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. Those are just the quarterbacks I could find that he 100% coached. That's an excellent list of young quarterbacks from one coach. And if knowing this list was as good as it was, you have at least 3 MVP candidates right there. A guy who most certainly could have been a Rookie of the Year, and a guy who essentially, he's a really good talent, but it's just unfortunately lackluster because of his circumstances, and Sam Darnold. And the reason why that resonates with Trevor is because if you have the best coach, the most likely outcome is you're going to have the best results, especially if you're with one of the best programs, especially if you're just naturally very well talented. It's going to help a guy like him really succeed and most likely had the best results considering the pedigree and the talent level that this one quarterback's coach maybe didn't discover, but maybe helped to refine. Jordan Palmer worked extensively with Josh Allen, and then he goes from a potential bust bottom third quarterback to a potential MVP candidate. He helped Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson go from really good college quarterbacks to just go from potential starters to now NFL superstars. And Joe Burrow looks easily, maybe behind Justin Herbert as the top quarterback from last year's draft, and he could potentially crack that top half list and could be what turns the Cincinnati Bengals around finally after so many years of turmoil. It's because of the fact that he knows how to work with the talent he has, and having those type of resources really help, especially in a year where the resources these coaches have don't really line up that well. But maybe, let's say I'm a coach from, let's say, Carolina, or let's say I'm from a Washington football team and need to evaluate a potential quarterback. Maybe instead of just simply going to the player itself, I could get an outside opinion. I could go to a guy like Jordan Palmer, who's worked with the guy directly and says, hey, this is what this guy does well, this is what this guy doesn't do well. However, these things are coachable. And then it can give the coach another evaluation. And there's also the reputation behind it too, where you've worked with one of the top coaches, of course the results are going to yield very strong. And the reason I mention all that is because during that footage I saw of Trevor Lawrence on his pro day, Jordan Palmer was essentially running the show, trying to make sure everything went as smoothly as humanly possible, which it 100% did. And because of that, it really helped showcase the best of what Trevor could do, which is, a lot of the deep balls, finding a lot of the touch, really making sure that his body and feet were set, especially on some of the scramble drills and some of the breakdown plays and stuff like that. And yeah, it's kind of easy when you have one receiver and no defense. However, just being able to show that those throws can be made is really massive, especially to a lot of these NFL execs and coaches. And especially with, the head coach of that number one overall pick team, Urban Meyer with the Jacksonville Jaguars, being right there, it's super important. And it's had to be done. And especially because of the fact that Trevor didn't exactly have the opportunity to lift the same way, especially because of the fact he's getting shoulder surgery. I think it was an excellent showcase of the talent level you're going to get by drafting this kid number one overall. He's been compared to guys like John Elway, compared to guys like Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck. And I have gone through that discussion over and over and over again. I cannot count the number of times where I've compared, Andrew Luck's numbers to Peyton Manning's numbers to John Elway's numbers, so on and so forth in their careers. I've done it so many times, but the reason why I keep doing it is because if Trevor Lawrence is supposed to be as talented as those guys, why not compare them to those guys? There's no reason for me not to. What's the harm in it? Nothing. And now when I really think of that and really analyze the way that all those things kind of line up and mesh, it kind of helps paint a larger picture, especially when it comes to context. Now, the context regarding, a lot of the plays that Trevor Lawrence made and a lot of the balls he was able to throw, part of the importance of that is that he didn't necessarily have full power. in his legs and his torso because he wasn't lifting, he doesn't have full power. Especially if he's getting shoulder surgery within the next several weeks. Now, the good thing is that it doesn't really affect his throwing arm that much. All the surgery and rehab is on his non-dominant arm. But however, in a sport like the NFL, when you're most likely going to be falling a lot on that shoulder, having to lead, chest bumps with that shoulder, having to push guys and tackle guys and take all these hits on the shoulder like that, it's going to get brutal. I remember when I broke my ankle about 2 years ago, even just something as simple as walking was going to mess it up more. So then I went to physical therapy and did all the treatment. That's very low impact in the sense of the amount that like my physical foot was hitting the ground, but high impact in the case of how much my ankle and my body weight and all that was actually pressing on my ankle. It's the same thing with the shoulder for Trevor Lawrence. Doesn't seem like much now, but when he's getting bumped by a defensive lineman who's going to take him down on the ground and maybe he lands shoulder first, even with the pads, it's going to be tough for him to handle. So getting something like this has been more imperative than ever, especially for a young guy like him who likely isn't going to get back and ready with treatment until right before training camp, or I guess in this case, regular season begins. Who knows how that's going to be? We'll have to keep track, obviously. But it's going to be mentally and physically and emotionally draining for someone like Trevor who can't use that extremity at all for the next couple of weeks. And then the rest of the time after that is nothing but treatment and treatment and treatment. And treatment is tough. Treatment is not easy. But it's an absolutely necessary portion of what goes on throughout the physical therapy process. And I don't know about him, but I remember for me, when I broke my ankle, one of the best feelings I had was when I was done. When I was able to go solo on my own, when I essentially didn't have to come back again. It was so freeing, it was so relieving. When I basically had to tell my physical therapist, hey, I know all the work you've done has been amazing. However, I've been doing all the exercises you've been telling me to do. I've been continuing the treatment, not just in the office space, but outside the office space, and I think I'm ready. I have no pain, no struggles, no nothing. And at the time I was working out, my calves got back to normal. My calves and my thighs got back to its normal size. And when he saw that, I was like, okay. And especially for something like that, where you're spending so much time out of your week doing training and rehab and all that, it's taxing, it's draining, it's difficult. But having a pro day so early, before you're supposed to have shoulder surgery, makes that much of a difference for a guy like him. And now we'll have to see how the pro days of some of the other prospects comes out, especially as the footage comes out in the next several days. But rehab is tough. The throws are beautiful. And if there's anyone who can help him do it, the team around him, the rehab, the physical therapy, the quarterback coaching is all going to be on point. It's going to help him succeed the most. And that's all I had for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like, rate us 5 stars, and be sure to give us a comment. It sure helps us out a lot. Don't forget to follow us on all of our favorite social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And don't forget to share this, and don't forget to subscribe as well. I'll see you here next time on this installment of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Ryan Lee. Stay safe, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.